a nighttime airstrike. On the international front, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has called on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza. Erdogan said that Israeli attacks amount to a genocide, and he has also urged governments worldwide to work for a humanitarian ceasefire in the region. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise on other front of Israel-Lebanon border, and more than 4,200 people have been displaced from villages in South Lebanon by clashes on the border with Israel. According to local officials, the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah and allied Palestinian groups in Lebanon have launched daily missile strikes on northern Israel since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Now, while Israel has responded by shelling border areas in South Lebanon, so far the clashes have killed at least 22 people in Lebanon, 4 of them civilians. In other updates, evacuation efforts by various nations also continue. A plane from Israel that has landed in Tokyo with 60 Japanese nationals and 18 South Koreans.
The Israel-Hamas war has dragged on for 2 weeks now. Every day, the war is taking a deadlier turn. Israel's relentless bombing of the Gaza Strip continues as we speak. But when will all this end? Frankly, we do not know. But what we do know is that the world, especially the Muslim world, has not turned a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. From Turkey to South Korea and from Malaysia to the United States, people around the world are protesting against the heavy toll that Israel's bombings are taking on civilians in Gaza hospitals, churches, even schools and makeshift shelter. Everything under the sun in Gaza is susceptible to Israeli airstrikes.
Ümmetin çocuklarını katlettiler. Annelerini yok ettiler. İhtiyar yaşlı demediler. Herkesi katlediyorlar bunlar. Ama bunların hesabı ağır olacak inşallah.
شعور بالحزن على الشهداء والأطفال والنساء، شعور بالتابع للحزن الظلم والقهر، إنه الدول الغربية تنادي بحقوق الإنسان وحقوق الحيوان ولا يرون أي شيء من مشاهد أطفال غزة.
Israel has vowed to wipe out the Hamas Islamist group that rules Gaza after it launched a massive multi-pronged attack against Israel on October 7th. Over 1,400 people were killed as Hamas terrorists went on a rampage through towns and kibbutz region in southern Israel. The gunmen also took over 200 hostages, including foreign nationals. Israel, in turn, has pounded Gaza with airstrikes and put the enclave's 2.3 million people under a total siege, banning shipments, even of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Since October 7th, when Israel began its retaliatory strikes on Palestine, over 4,000 people have been killed so far, including more than 1,500 children.
الآن ذاهبون إن شاء الله لنصرة شعبنا فلسطين ونصرة بيت الله المقدس، ونلبي نداء المرجعية ونداء الشعب والعروبة إن شاء الله. وندعو كل الشعوب وكل العرب التضامن لفك الحصار عن المجاهدين، ونستنكر الصهيوني الغاشم اليهود وأمريكا الشيطان الأكبر على قصف الأطفال وتدمير المنازل وتهجير العوائل.
As protests continue around the world, WION's correspondent Kalden Ongmu has sent us this report from one of the pro-Palestine protest sites in South Africa.
There's a heavy police presence outside Embassy of Israel in Pretoria as South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, alongside several civil society, community and faith-based organizations have marched to the Embassy of Israel in the country's capital, Pretoria, to pledge the support for Palestine as the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues to escalate. The ANC's participation in this initiative is in line with its long-standing long-standing support for a two-state solution to one of the longest-running conflicts in the Middle East. Previously, President Cyril Ramaphosa has reiterated the call for dialogue and negotiations to resolve the ongoing war. Ramaphosa has said the conflict has left many sad and fearful about the future of international relations. ANC has also called for the opening of humanitarian corridors and a United Nations-led negotiation process towards resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict. This is Alden Ongmo from Pretoria, South Africa, for WION World is One.
Circling around the world, Palestinians in West Bank cities also took to the streets on Friday. Hundreds marched in solidarity with Gaza as war rages on between Israel and Hamas. This is in Hebron. A few Palestinians waved Russian flags and held up posters bearing the images of Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Meanwhile, hundreds waved Palestinian flags in the city of Ramallah, which is the seat of the Palestinian leaders in the West Bank. The demonstrations come after a church in Gaza City was hit by what Palestinian authorities say was an Israeli airstrike. The church was sheltering a large number of displaced people, many of whom are believed to be killed or injured in the strike.
إسرائيل الليلة قصفت الكنيسة على رأس كل من لجأ إليها وكأنها الكنيسة كانت البيت والملاذ الآمن لكل هؤلاء الفارين من هول الصواريخ والقصف والدمار واستهداف المدنيين والقصف العشوائي. أنا بدي أوجه رسالة هون للمحتل الإسرائيلي أقول له قابل جيش لجيش المدنيين أنت خسران ومهزوم وراح تنهزم لو استشهد من.
Well, in the Gaza Strip, 2 million people displaced by the war await critical supplies of food, water and electricity and search for their loved ones amid airstrikes by Israel. There's an eerie silence in the town of kibbutz in Israel, struck by Hamas's terror. Trucks loaded with aid have been stranded at the Rafah crossing near Egypt, despite getting a green light from Israel. It still remains unclear when the delivery of relief material will start. Washington says details are still being hammered out. Let's see what the numbers say. Before the war, around 450 trucks were arriving in daily to Gaza. Now Gaza awaits the passage of 20 trucks of supplies, aid that has been strangled by warring sides.
الواحد هن لا حياة لا أكل لا شرب لا مية الواحد بده يروح على الحمام بس الواحد يفوت صغيره بقعد يستنى 100 نفر في الدار هنا لا حياة ولا إشي عايشين في خوف وعايشين برعب.
Israel's relentless strikes have killed over 4,100 people on the ground. Israeli government says it's hit over 100 operational targets of militant organizations in the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, hospitals, churches, refugee camps and schools have been targeted. Look at this visual. A Greek Orthodox church sheltering hundreds was hit by Israeli strikes, and all that is left is piles of debris and rubble. Israel says the church was damaged in a strike on a militant command center. People continue to scramble for survivors beneath the rubble. The situation is dire. Look at Palestinians rescuing children trapped beneath the rubble. This is after an Israeli strike hit a house in Jabalia refugee camp. There's commotion and chaos. Some children patiently wait while others cry as they are being rescued. The smell of death is all over. Mourners held mass funerals for their loved ones on Friday after overnight Israeli shelling on Khan Yunis, southern Gaza Strip. Israel has ordered people in northern Gaza to move southwards as it prepares for a possible ground assault. Over 1 million people have been displaced in the region. Their lives have been reduced to makeshift homes. Rows of camps have been set up by the United Nations agency's headquarters in Khan Yunis to house those arriving from north. Let's take you to the other side now. New York State Governor visited Kfar Aza kibbutz in Israel with Israel's Foreign Minister. This is a site where it all started in southern Israel. Kibbutz, just 3 kilometers away from the Gaza Strip, was the hardest hit site by Hamas militants. This is what is left now. Destroyed and damaged homes, at least 1,000 people were killed in the southern Israel region. Some in their homes, some on the streets, and others at the dance festival. These visuals from kibbutz tell you the tale of what war does to the city. Homes have been burned, gardens trashed, and trails of blood covering the floors of some homes. As the war rages on, there seems to be no end to suffering of civilians on both sides.
Earlier, our diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibul talked to IDF international spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, and he talks about the preparation done by IDF to deal with Hamas. Listen in.
The ongoing situation in Israel is something that has concerned the world. The terror attacks by Hamas has been a shocking development for the region and across the world. With me is the spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces. So welcome to WION. If you can detail as to the preparations which has been done by the IDF to deal with Hamas. Now, we know that there has been build-up at the border with Gaza. So do we expect a ground offensive very soon?
The IDF now is in day 14 of its offensive to destroy Hamas, to dismantle its capabilities, to seek out, pursue its leaders and terrorists. Indeed, in the course of the last 14 days, the IDF has recruited some 300,000 reservists. Their role, if instructed to, will be across the various services of the IDF and also including the ground offensive. If the ground offensive is instructed and approved by the government, we will be prepared to mobilize. The reservists are now being equipped and trained and given specific tasks in anticipation for that ground offensive, and that is what they are preparing for. Indeed, it does appear that that is the way forward, but we are, as I said, waiting for the green light from the government in order to mobilize. Currently, we are striking Hamas in its entirety, seeking out its leaders, destroying its operational capabilities, its command and control positions, and of course, hunting down its leaders and the perpetrators of the atrocities of the 7th of October.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION, and we can only hope that everyone remains safe. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION.
Now, this morning, we've decided to show you how lives of so many have been devastated on both sides of Gaza border. While in the Gaza Strip, 2 million people displaced by the war await critical supplies of food, water and electricity and search for their loved ones amid airstrikes by Israel. There is an eerie silence in the town of kibbutz in Israel, which was struck by Hamas's terror. Trucks loaded with aid have been stranded at the Rafah crossing near Egypt, despite getting a green light from Israel. It still remains unclear when the delivery of relief material will start. Washington says details are still being hammered out. Now let's see what the numbers say. Before the war, around 450 trucks were arriving in daily. Now Gaza awaits the passage of 20 trucks of supplies that has been strangled by warring sides.
واحد هن لا حياة لا أكل لا شرب لا مي. الواحد بده يروح على الحمام بس الواحد يفوت صغيره بقعد يستنى 100 نفر في الدار. هنا لا حياة ولا إشي. عايشين في خوف وعايشين برعب.
Israel's relentless strikes have killed over 4,100 people on the ground. Israel says that it's hit over 100 operational targets of militant organization in the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, however, hospitals, churches, refugee camps and schools have been targeted. Look at these visuals. A Greek Orthodox church sheltering hundreds was hit by Israeli strikes, and all that is left is piles of debris and rubble. Israel says the church was damaged in a strike on a militant command center. People continue to scramble for survivors beneath the rubble. The situation is dire. Look at Palestinians rescuing children trapped beneath the rubble. This is after an Israeli strike hit a house in Jabalia refugee camp. There is commotion and chaos. Some children patiently wait while others cry as they are being rescued. Death is all one can smell in the air. Mourners held mass funerals for their loved ones on Friday after overnight Israeli shelling on Khan Yunis, southern Gaza Strip. Israel has ordered people in northern Gaza to move south as it prepares for a possible ground assault. Over 1 million people have been displaced in the region. Their life has been reduced to makeshift homes. Rows and rows of camps have been set up by UN agencies' headquarters in Khan Yunis to house those arriving from north. Now let's take you to the other side now. New York State Governor visited Kafar kibbutz in Israel with Israel's foreign minister. This is the site where it all started in southern Israel, kibbutz. Just 3 kilometers away from the Gaza Strip, it was the hardest hit site by Hamas militants. Look what is left now. Destroyed and damaged homes. At least 1,000 people were killed in the southern Israel, some in their homes, some on the streets, and others at the dance festival.
Which they are in now, trying to rebuild the community that was here. Out of 400 people, 1 of every 4 people is either missing or dead. That's a big shot for the community. It was a very close community. It's a one big family.
Now these visuals from kibbutz tell you the tale of what war does to the city. Homes have been burned, gardens trashed, and trails of blood covering the floors of some homes. As the war wages on, there seems to be no end to suffering of civilians on both sides.
It's been over 2 weeks since the Hamas-Israel war, and amidst all the devastation, there are finally some positive developments. Hamas has released 2 American hostages, and there's hope that the much-needed aid can finally reach Gaza. But even as this happens, threat of an escalation continues. But first, let's tell you about the positives. Hamas has released 2 American hostages. It's a mother and daughter. The duo were released, the release was secured through Qatar's mediation efforts. The Israeli Defense Forces say it's the military pressure that led to this. The White House claims that the U.S. was quote-unquote very much involved in the release. President Joe Biden has spoken to the 2 released Americans. These 2 women were among over 200 hostages held captive by Hamas, creating a stark reminder of the hostage situation. An empty Shabbat table has been installed in a plaza outside the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, with a place setting for each confirmed missing person. Families of the hostages participated in the symbolic dinner as they await the return of their loved ones. U.S. President Joe Biden has said that he believes that aid would reach Gaza in the next 24 to 48 hours. This is after a commitment from the Israelis and the President of Egypt as part of a diplomatic breakthrough regarding aid passing through the Rafah border. On the other hand, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited the crossing on Friday. He appealed for aid trucks to move into the besieged Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, new satellite images show trucks with humanitarian aid gathered on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing with Gaza. Speaking about the likely ground offensive, as per Israel's economy minister, the military has the green light to launch a ground invasion. The minister stressed that the primary goal of the ground operation is to eliminate Hamas off the map. However, the U.S. and its allies have been urging Israel to be strategic and clear about its goals on the ground invasion of Gaza. They have warned against a prolonged occupation and have stressed on avoiding civilian casualties. This was done as part of private discussions of Western defense officials with their Israeli counterparts. Meanwhile, a Gaza hospital says it faces imminent threat of airstrike from Israeli army. The administration of Al-Quds hospital in Gaza says the Israeli army has contacted them, demanding them to immediately evacuate the hospital in preparation for a nighttime airstrike. On the international front, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza. Erdogan said that Israeli attacks amount to genocide. He has also urged governments worldwide to work for a humanitarian ceasefire in the region. Meanwhile, the Israeli army on Friday displayed a large cache of weapons and supplies obtained from Hamas militants amid the attack on October 7th. The weapons seized included Hamas's grenades, landmines and rocket-propelled grenades. According to Major General of the Israeli army, the weapons on display only made up 10% of total seized, while he says Hamas fighters only managed to use 30% of their weapons during the attack against Israel. Hamas has released 2 American hostages in response to Qatari mediation efforts. These are the people that were abducted along with over 200 others during the October 7th attack. The first hostages, who are an American mother and daughter, that's 59-year-old Judith Ranan and her 17-year-old daughter, Natalie Ranan. They were visiting the kibbutz region as part of a trip to Israel to celebrate the Jewish holidays. Natalie's father says he is overjoyed on the news of their return.
I spoke with my daughter earlier today. She sounds very good. She looks very good. She was very happy and she's waiting to come home. Her mother has a little scratch on her hand, but she told me it's nothing. She's okay. I spoke earlier with President Biden. I thank him for his concern, for his helping with the release of them. And he was very, very nice. I spoke with Governor Pritzker, and he was nice, and I thank him very much for his effort.
Israel says the remaining hostages are being held somewhere inside Gaza, but their exact whereabouts within the enclave are still unknown, making their rescue more complicated. Officials say that many could be held in the warrens of tunnels under Gaza that Israeli troops call the Gaza Metro. Now, according to reports, an estimated 200 people, including 30 teenagers and children, along with 20 people over the age of 60, are being held hostage. Hamas says it has 200 hostages and that 50 more are held by other armed groups in the enclave. Hamas earlier said that 20 hostages have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, but did not give any further details. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appointed a retired general as Israel's coordinator on hostages and missing persons. Qatari mediators have said that they have tried to negotiate freedom for Israeli women and children seized by Hamas in return for the release of 36 Palestinian women and children from Israel's prisons. Israel has bombarded Gaza Strip ever since the October 7th attack. A total siege of the Gaza Strip is also being executed by Israeli forces, which has blocked all supplies, including essentials, for over 2 million Gazan residents. Israel had earlier said that the blockade on Gaza will continue until all hostages are released. So far, there has been no indication other than the latest release of American hostages that a deal might be at hand. Turkey is also talking with Hamas to secure the release of foreigners, civilians and children. U.S. President Joe Biden has also said that his administration is working like hell to find American hostages held by Hamas. The U.S. has sent a small team of Special Operations Forces to Israel to help with intelligence and planning for any eventual operations to rescue the hostages. And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Teherani has sent us this report from New York.
In a dramatic turn of events, one family's prayers were answered as 2 American hostages, a mother and her 17-year-old daughter, were released by Hamas and are now in Israeli soil. Hamas said that it was a gesture of goodwill towards the United States, the quote-unquote fascist Biden administration, while President Biden in a statement said that he worked around the clock to get these hostages released, with Qatar playing a mediating role. President Biden saying that he will continue to work to get the remaining Americans back home. Meanwhile, there are about 200 hostages in Hamas captivity. the release of these hostages come at a time when Bloomberg is reporting that the United States, along with its European allies, have called on Israel to delay its ground offensive in hopes of buying time to release more hostages. It also comes shortly after President Biden, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak all visited Israel as they face pressure to bring hostages home. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
The Israel-Hamas war has dragged on for 2 weeks now. Every day, the war is taking a deadlier turn. Israel's relentless bombing of the Gaza Strip continues as we speak. But when will it all end? Frankly, we do not know. But what we do know is that the world, especially the Muslim world, has not turned a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. From Turkey to South Korea and from Malaysia to the United States, people around the world are protesting against the heavy toll that Israel's bombings are taking on civilians in Gaza, hospitals, churches, even schools and makeshift shelter. Everything under the sun in Gaza is susceptible to Israeli airstrikes.
Ümmetin çocuklarını katlettiler. Annelerini yok ettiler. İhtiyar, yaşlı demediler. Herkesi katlediyorlar bunlar. Ama bunların hesabı ağır olacak inşallah.
شعور بالحزن على الشهداء والأطفال والنساء، شعور بالتابع للحزن، الظلم والقهر، إنه الدول الغربية تنادي بحقوق الإنسان وحقوق الحيوان ولا يرون أي شيء من مشاهد أطفال غزة.
Israel has vowed to wipe out the Hamas Islamist group that rules Gaza after it launched a massive multi-pronged attack against Israel on October 7th. Over 1,400 people were killed as Hamas terrorists went on a rampage through towns and kibbutz region in southern Israel. The gunmen also took over 200 hostages, including foreign nationals. Israel, in turn, has pounded Gaza with airstrikes and put the enclave's 2.3 million people under a total siege, banning shipments even of food, fuel and medical supplies. Since October 7th, and Israel began its retaliatory strikes on Palestine, over 4,000 people have been killed so far, including more than 1,500 children. It is the 15th day of Israel's war with Hamas. The IDF forces have relentlessly bombarded the Gaza Strip. The fate of over 2 million Palestinians hangs in the balance. Food, water, electricity remains scarce in Gaza. The hostage situation still remains unresolved. Families of Israeli civilians and foreign nationals are waiting for news to know about their kidnapped loved ones. And worst of all, we are yet to see any sign of de-escalation. In fact, there is palpable fear that the war might just spill over to other countries. West Asia can turn into a dangerously volatile region again. Just days ago, Saudi Arabia asked its citizens to leave Lebanon immediately. The announcement has sparked fears that Iran-backed Hezbollah may formally enter the battleground. But the escalating artillery fire at Lebanon's border with Israel is not the only indication of this rising concern. Russia has once again made pointed statements about the raging conflict. On a visit to North Korea, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov raised concerns over Israel's war with Hamas. He warned that this war could turn into a regional conflict and blamed Iran for the Gaza crisis, saying, quote-unquote, a mere provocation.
As for the Gaza Strip, the risk of this crisis escalating into a regional conflict is quite serious. I've already mentioned that the United States vetoed a resolution that called for a stop to any hostilities and to begin to resolve humanitarian issues. Therefore, the United States has apparently showed that it is not ready to call for a truce, a ceasefire. And if this is so, then they will probably believe the conflict may grow.
Moscow has advised its citizens against traveling to Israel, Lebanon, Jordan and the Palestinian territories. The situation is heating up, says Russia's foreign ministry. Now, given the latest announcement, Lavrov's concern around a war spillover may not be completely unfounded. But it seems there is more to be worried about. A U.S. warship in West Asia reported the successful interception of cruise missiles and drones. But this is where things get worrying. The airstrike was carried out by Yemen's Houthi rebels. US says the target might not be its naval fleet, but Israel instead.
Information about these engagements is still being processed. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel. Our defensive response was one that we would have taken for any similar threat in the region, where we're able to do so against our interest personnel and our partners. This attack may be ongoing, so if we have more information to share, we will.
Now, this raises various questions. Have the Houthis officially joined the war to lend support to Hamas? Will more rebel and militant factions from the region join support of Hamas? Is this going to turn into a multi-front war? And more importantly, has the presence of U.S. military in the region added fuel to the fire?
Where are you from? My ex woke up, yes.
It's been over 2 weeks into the Hamas-Israel war, and amidst all the devastation, there are finally some positive